Welcome to the FarmBits Podcast, a product of Nebraska Extension Digital Agriculture. I'm Jackson Stansel.
And I'm Samantha Teeton.
And we come to you each week to discuss the trends, the realities, and the value of digital agriculture.
Through interviews and panels with experts, producers, and innovators from all sectors of digital technology, we hope that you step away from each episode with new practical knowledge of digital agriculture technology.
Welcome to the third episode in our connectivity series here on the FarmBits Podcast.
We've heard from Dr. John Fulton and Dr. Keenan McRoberts so far in this series regarding the importance of connectivity and how public and private partnerships can drive improvements in connectivity.
For this episode, we are excited to welcome Dr. Ranveer Chandra, the Chief Scientist of Microsoft Azure Global and Partner Researcher at Microsoft Research.
Ranveer initiated and is still heavily involved in the FarmBeats project at Microsoft Research, which has recently led to the launch of Azure FarmBeats, a cloud platform enabling data-driven insights for agricultural technology companies and other experts.
In this episode, we will hear from Ranveer on many topics associated with FarmBeats, from how the FarmBeats projects brought innovation to rural connectivity, to how Azure FarmBeats is enabling better decision-making once that data actually gets to the cloud.
This interview kept us on the edge of our seats, so here's our interview with Ranveer Chandra. Thank you so much for joining us, Ranveer. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your background and how you first got involved with Microsoft?
Yeah. So my background is I grew up in India. I grew up in a city called Jamshedpur. It's a steel city in India. But growing up, I did go to my grandparents' farm a lot. And my grandparents used to live in Bihar. It's in North India. And it's one of the poorest states in India. And I used to visit my grandparents. They used to farm mangoes and sugarcane and rice and wheat. And they had a smallish farm. Back then, I did not like anything to do with agriculture. I used to go to the farm because these farms, they did not have electricity, these villages. They had no toilets. It was in the middle of nowhere. But I used to spend 4 months every year with my grandparents.
Sure.
I didn't look forward to that. But in hindsight, it did expose me to a lot of primitive forms of agriculture, like bullet-driven tractors and hand seeding and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I came to the US. I did my undergrad in computer science in India. I came to the US. I did my PhD in computer science at Cornell University. And then after my PhD in computer science, I joined Microsoft. And the reason I started FarmBeats was because of this exposure to the farms in India. That is, all the projects that I've done at Microsoft Research, the ones I've started, have this element of trying to impact the people worldwide, not just the people in cities, but people in remote areas. And that was one of the triggers for FarmBeats as well. That is, I want to build tech to improve the lives of farmers, of everyone worldwide.
Sure. So, Microsoft is not a traditional entity that's involved in agriculture. And so why was the company on board with you kind of starting this project and getting involved in ag?
Yeah, so at Microsoft Research, we are expected to take risks, expected to do things that are out of the way. That is not necessarily something that Microsoft does right now. And that is why when I started FarmBeats, of course, it wasn't a big project. I was given 4 interns. I was told, okay, see what we could do. And that's how the project started. Sure. The key thing here was that we believe that the future of agriculture is data-driven. It's going to be driven by data, by technology. And even though Microsoft might not be the ones building the tools directly used by the farmers, we could be building the basis for a lot of tools in ag tech, in food tech. And that's what we are doing at Microsoft. At Microsoft right now, the approach we are taking to industry, be it with agriculture, be it in any other industry, is we are building the digital stack for agriculture. And the customers for us are our partners. Essentially, they are the ones who are building solutions on top and taking those solutions to the growers, in this case with FarmBeats.
Awesome.
So can you expand on that data-driven decision part a little bit, and how is the FarmBeats project working to achieve that? What are you guys doing exactly?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Samantha. When I started FarmBeats, the first thing I did is I went and interviewed lots of farmers. I went and I talked to them. I volunteered on a couple farms. I stayed for 1 week in upstate New York in this farm, and I essentially attended these meetings at 5 a.m. I saw how hard farmers work. What I realized when I met each of these farmers is that the farmers know a lot about their farm. They have been farming there in some cases for years, in some cases for decades, if not for generations. Some, like one farmer, he could feel the soil and say what's going on. Another farmer, he would just taste soil and say what's going on. They know a lot about their farm. Yet a lot of decisions these farmers make is based on guesswork. Like they know a lot about their farm, yet when to water, how much to water, when to seed, when to harvest. All of these decisions are based on guesswork, which is where I believe one of the things that we could enable is with data-driven agriculture, we could augment a farmer's knowledge about their farm with data and with data-driven insights. That is, we can get the data from the farm, show them what the farm looks like right now. We can then use artificial intelligence to start making predictions of not what is it now, but what will it be an hour in the future, a day in the future, up to 5 days in advance, so that a grower can take smart, intelligent decisions. And that's the kind of future that we believe FarmBeats can enable, data-driven agriculture can enable.
Yeah. So how much of a challenge has the lack of rural connectivity, here in the US and obviously in other places as well? How much of a challenge has it been in terms of getting that data to where it can actually be used for artificial intelligence and some of these data-driven applications?
Yeah, no, that's another great question. That's the first thing we need to do to drive AI, as you rightly pointed out, is to get the data. Get the data about what the farm looks like right now, and then you'll be able to make any predictions. But getting this data is extremely difficult. There is, you can get satellite data, but satellite data is coarse-grained. It is not seen below the canopy. It's not seen below the ground. It's good data. It can see through clouds. Lots of issues with satellite data right now, for which you need on-the-ground information. But if there is no internet, how do you get data from the middle of the farm? And that is one of the first things we realized, that this needs to be addressed with FarmBeats. And with FarmBeats, we started looking at this problem of how pervasive is this lack of connectivity. It's huge. Like, farmers' house might have connectivity. A lot of the discussions that were happening was about bringing broadband to the households. Even that is a very important problem. But if you have to enable this data-driven agriculture, things like precision agriculture and so on, you need connectivity not only in the household, but in the farm as well. And that is one of the first issues we had to address as part of FarmBeats. And then we had to look at other issues as well. For example, there's no power, there's no electrical outlets where you can plug in your devices. There is, you can't be putting lots and lots of sensors. These sensors are expensive. So how do you gather information without putting lots of sensors in the farm? So these are some of the other issues that we had to address. But yeah, broadband was, lack of broadband in the farm was one of the first key realizations when we started to envision this concept of data-driven agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how are you actually going about addressing those? We've heard of a couple of creative ways, but can you kind of fill us in on that?
Yeah, one of the creative ways I'll talk about is something that I started working on in 2005 called TV white spaces. So this is one of the technologies that I've written some of the first papers on, is on a way to use unused TV channels to send and receive data. That is, what the TV white spaces enables is, imagine if you have, say, a Wi-Fi router that you can access a few miles away. Right now, when you turn on your router, as soon as you leave your house or your building, there's no internet. There's no Wi-Fi. With this, we could go much, much longer. And the way we did that was we put these Wi-Fi signals in empty TV channels. This is TV you watch using antennas, over-the-air TV. When you browse through these channels, on certain channels, you get a transmission. The other channels, all you see is white noise, nothing coming there. The technology we had built was a way to take this Wi-Fi signal and to put it in these noisy TV channels in a way that doesn't interfere with your TV reception in an adjacent channel. So you could be watching channel 7 at home. On channel 8, you could be sending Wi-Fi signals. And the reason this is so cool is that compared to Wi-Fi at the same power level, in UHF TV channels, your signals go 4 times farther. in UHF. In VHF, they go 12 times farther, and that's in free space, purely based on physics. If you put it through crops, canopies, forests, the signals just keep going through. It goes much more. Because the reason is that, just for people who are more tech savvy here is, the lower you go in the frequency space, your wavelength becomes bigger. Your wavelength becomes bigger. It can go through obstructions much, much better. So this is something that we've done. We've deployed back in the day in 2010, the FCC chairman had come to Microsoft campus to see the demo we had put together. This was made legal in the US in 2010. Since then, we've gone out, connected high schools, hospitals, dispensaries in various parts of the world using this technology. In fact, with the Airband initiative Microsoft announced in 2017, we had made a pledge to connect 3 million rural Americans to broadband using this technology. In fact, if you look at what's happened most recently, in fact, it was late October, early November, the FCC passed new regulations to make the TV white spaces even more favorable for rural areas, for farms. So the new regulations allow for higher antenna mounting, so you can mount the antennas higher. They allow higher transmit power levels. You can even geofence an area. You can say, this is my farm area, and over here, I can start transmitting at higher power. So you can really envision the future of this is going to be like a Wi-Fi-like scenario. You want your farm connected, put in this antenna, put in this device, and you can then start getting data from all your devices in that region. And not just getting small sensor data. These are broadband signals. You could be getting large amounts of data, large amounts of bandwidth. Because the key insight that we had for agriculture is that TV towers are where people are. People are the ones who watch TV. So in cities, most of the TV towers are in cities. If you go outside the city, most of the channels are just white noise. Like if you turn on TV in the farm, most of the channels are unoccupied. The more empty channels there are, the more available capacity there is. So if you're talking of, even if say 20 TV channels are available, we are talking of each channel is 6 megahertz wide. So 20 times 6, 120 megahertz of available spectrum. We are talking of a few hundred megabits per second, if not more, using that spectrum. So this is like unused spectrum, and the regulations are there. We need, that could be one way to bring broadband to the farm. But that said, one of the things I would like to highlight is that this is just one method. There's no clear just one solution. We'll have to use a combination of solutions to address this problem. Like, for example, we are also working with other companies. For example, with SpaceX, we announced a partnership with Starlink using low Earth orbit satellites. You can use those to bring connectivity as well. Now, of course, the way you would use it is you'd bring connectivity from satellite to a point. You can then use a terrestrial solution. For example, like TV white spaces, or it could be 5G, it could be private LTE. You could set up any of those in combination with, so all of these technologies need to work together along with another technology called edge compute. That is, rather than sending all of the data to the farm, you could be running things on an edge computer. And together, you might be able to address the problem of broadband connectivity. But going back to the point both of you raised, Samantha and Jackson, that is, we need to address this broadband problem if we are to get to the future of agriculture, which is going to be data-driven, driven by AI. If that is the future, we need to bring broadband to the farm.
Yep, absolutely.
Those are really cool solutions that you guys are coming up to, and we'll be interested to see how they get implemented. Another challenge can be the cost of technology. So there's a lot of interesting solutions out there, and these costs can kind of pile up for some producers. So how is FarmBeats potentially helping, though, provide solutions to connect some of these technologies or to maybe make it more of a feasible option?
Right. So with FarmBeats, what we are doing is building this data layer in the cloud. What FarmBeats is right now is it's a data platform in the cloud for ag tech companies. What we're doing is we are allowing you to bring in data from different data streams and then run your artificial intelligence pipelines in that. That's the state right now. But there are a few things that we are continuing to investigate as far as research. It's still in research on trying to bring down the cost of these solutions even more. So TV white spaces is one way to bring down the cost. The other way we are looking to bring down the cost is by reducing the number of sensors that are needed in a farm. Like, for example, suppose the question was, what is the soil moisture level 6 inches below the soil throughout the farm? what is the soil nutrient level? If you have to solve this problem, say just the soil moisture problem, both of you are in the agriculture department, you would understand this problem much better, that if you have to build such an accurate map, you would need lots and lots of sensors. You would need a sensor, say, every 10, 15 meters if you have to build an accurate map.
Yep.
But putting lots and lots of sensors is expensive to deploy, to manage. It will come in the way of the farmer as the farmer does the day-to-day job. So the question we asked was then, well, if you have to build a map, you can't put lots of sensors. How can you bring down the cost of building such maps? The way we did that is by using artificial intelligence. Our key idea was, well, if you could put only a few sensors in the farm, and then you use aerial imagery, and then use artificial intelligence to then bridge these two modes of sensing to build maps. The idea was very simple. If you have a farm, you intelligently decide where you put a few sensors, and then you use technologies such as drones or satellites to get the aerial image. What you do with the aerial image is, then wherever you have a sensor, you look at what does the aerial image look like. You use that to train a machine learning model, and then you use that machine learning model to predict these values in other parts of the farm where you have the image, but you don't have sensors. And we wrote a paper on this. We showed that using such a technology, you can be 3 times more accurate than existing schemes that don't use aerial imagery. So this was one way in which we can further bring down the cost of solutions. Yeah. But we could do more, and we are continuing to invest in other ways to bring down costs. Like initially, for example, we were using drones. And as you know, drones can be expensive. They still cost a few $1,000s, if not more. And they only last, say, 30 minutes on a single charge. The question we asked was, we went to Africa, for example. We wanted to do these trials in Africa and India with smallholder farmers. Once we went there, we in one country, we didn't get permission to fly drones. We were told that, hey, go get the permission from the Ministry of Defense. At which point, they're never going to grant a few researchers the permission to fly a drone. So then our question was, how can you get aerial imagery from a farm at low cost? So the way we solved that problem is we went really low tech. Our idea was to use helium-filled balloons. These are about 4 to 5 feet in diameter. And these balloons are tethered to the ground with a rope, and they fly up to 150 to 200 feet. What we built was a weatherproof mount where a grower can place their smartphone with a camera facing down and a battery pack attached to it. And this thing can stay up from 4 to 7 days taking images of the same part of the farm. And in fact, not just that. So there is a farmer close to Microsoft campus. He used this to monitor floods in his farm. He could see, because right now what used to happen was he would come every morning to his farm. If he saw any amount of flood in the farm, he would throw away his entire crop, because based on regulations, he cannot sell any crop that is touched by the flood. So with this, he actually had visual proof to see which crops are touched by the flood, and only throws away those crops. In fact, we could do a bit more than that. Like in places like India and Africa, where labor is inexpensive, you can someone just walk around with a balloon over the entire farm. And then we use computer vision and artificial intelligence algorithms to stabilize the imagery. And then we construct these aerial views of farms. So you can see how, because this is another way to bring down costs, where if you have, instead of using expensive drones, you use these low-cost balloons. There's some more cutting-edge stuff we are doing where the kind of vision we are enabling is, can you use your smartphone to start measuring soil moisture and soil EC? That is by using Wi-Fi on the phone. This is very new research which we did, where, you know, these sensors that you buy right now, they are expensive. They're still a few $100s, if not more. But many of these smallholder farmers, they won't spend a few $100s to buy a sensor in the farm, because the question they ask is, what is the ROI? What is the return of investment? If I put a sensor, it'll only tell me what's happening here, not what's happening a few meters away. So then the question, the idea we had was that, well, farmers won't spend a few $100s for a sensor, but many of them have a smartphone, even if it is an inexpensive $100 smartphone. If they have a smartphone, it has a Wi-Fi chipset in it. If it has a Wi-Fi chipset in it, the key idea we had was that the time of flight of a Wi-Fi signal depends on the permittivity of the material. And so, for example, if the soil is moist, the signal will take longer to traverse the same distance. except this time is in nanoseconds. And Wi-Fi doesn't have the bandwidth to measure this in nanoseconds. And the next idea we had was that most of these Wi-Fi chipsets have multiple antennas in them. So instead of measuring the absolute time of flight, if you measure the relative time of flight, then you could actually use that to measure soil moisture and soil electrical conductivity. So we then, we wrote a paper on this, we built a system, we showed it to Bill Gates when he visited the farm that we have close to Microsoft campus. And in fact, the blog that he wrote on FarmBeats, the title of the blog, Bill Gates' blog, was "Can the Wi-Fi in your phone feed the world?" So we are super excited about this. This is like cutting edge tech. Just the first research paper has been written. A lot more research needs to happen before it really becomes mainstream. But that, I believe, is the future, where we can then equip every farmer with tools so that they know what's happening in the farm, both above the ground and below the ground. Right? But these are all different things. We are coming at it from a computer science side of things, from an electrical engineering side of things, saying, how can we bring technology to help the farmers, to help build ag tech solutions? That, because this is all data, if we provide to both of you, I'm sure you could do lots of things on it in farmers' lives.
Yeah, that's the hope. And I think it's so cool listening to these technologies. You know, I'm no wireless communications expert, but, you know, just I took a wireless communications class last spring, and I'm thinking about, you know, MIMO technologies and all these sorts of things. And, you know, it's kind of related to what you were just talking about, but it's so interesting how you're thinking outside the box and making use of those technologies that are already in place that farmers already have, but just how can we maximize the efficiency of them is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. No, it is. That is the case. That is, a lot of these tools in computer science are being used for other industry. Part of what we are also doing is thinking outside the box in the context of agriculture and trying to bring technology which are being adopted in other industries to agriculture.
Yeah, that's really cool. And, you know, since you've kind of brought up the kind of the low cost thing, and also all the algorithms, like the machine learning algorithms and artificial intelligence that you're using now to almost, for lack of a better word, interpolate data from sensors. I kind of want to get into the FarmBeats Azure platform. And so who kind of are your intended users, and what are you seeking to achieve with that FarmBeats Azure platform?
Yeah. So a lot of what I was describing with TV white spaces, with Wi-Fi based sensing balloons, all of this was in research, right? We were all thinking in terms of two parts of FarmBeats. One was data acquisition. How do you get a lot of this data to the cloud? And the second piece is on, once you start getting all of these different data streams from sensors, from drones, from satellites, from tractors, how do you merge all of these to drive new insights? Like the interpolation algorithm was one. We've done more in that space around microclimate prediction. So then I transitioned over from research to products, and we shipped the first version of Azure FarmBeats. And Azure FarmBeats is this platform in the cloud for other ag tech companies to build their solutions. That is, we are able to bring data from diverse data streams from the farm, and then allow farmers to then allow these ag tech companies to run their AI machine learning algorithms on top to take it to the growers. So that's the platform that we built. Essentially, it's about bringing, for any piece of land, what FarmBeats would allow through APIs is you should be able to provide a polygon, which is a shapefile. And for that polygon, which could be a field, which could be a farm, we then bring in lots of data streams from satellites, from weather stations, from farm equipment, from sensors, other data streams. And then, as you can tell, these data streams have different time resolutions, have different spatial resolutions. With drones, you get centimeter resolution. With satellites, you'll get meter level resolution, meters. So how do you merge all of these? How do you run AI on top of this? So this is a platform that we are building with FarmBeats. But then the way it goes to the market is through partners, is through ISVs. We are not building a grower-based solution. So for us, a farmer might be using these ag tech tools with FarmBeats behind the background, but they might never know that they're using these solutions behind the scenes. And towards this, we've done several partnerships, both in terms of partners whose data we can bring to the platform, as well as in terms of partners who build the solutions on top. For example, we recently announced a partnership with DTN, which is a big weather company for agriculture. We are bringing DTN's weather to the FarmBeats platform. So once you define a shapefile or a polygon, we can start getting that data, the weather data from DTN to the platform. And then regarding the actual farmer-facing offering, we recently did a partnership with Land O'Lakes, where Land O'Lakes is building their digital agriculture platform on top of FarmBeats. And we are bringing the latest in tech, while Land O'Lakes is bringing all of their agricultural expertise to build those agricultural solutions on top of FarmBeats.
Yeah, that's really cool.
That is. We actually heard you speak at a conference a couple of years ago, and it stuck out to us, that collaboration piece. We just remember you talking to these people and saying, like, we want to work and learn the agriculture side from you guys. And that was just so cool. And so with this collaboration piece, there can be some other challenges. How do you guys distinguish like the ownership of models and algorithms created from these other companies or whatever, and putting them together with FarmBeats, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Samantha. It's about how do we drive this partner ecosystem? How do we build this collaboration on top? So in this case, a lot of these AI expertise that comes on top, like for example, building a corn-based model or a model for wheat, we are not the experts in corn and wheat. We will never get there. And these are the things which we want to empower our partners to get there. We want to empower our partners with the latest tools, with the latest tech tools, latest in artificial intelligence, latest in Internet of Things, edge compute, so that they can then start building the solutions on top. The models by itself, it belongs to them. We are providing the platform and they build the models, but we want them to take their models to the agriculture, to other companies who we work with. For example, one in the Land O'Lakes scenario, just going back to them, one of the partners we work with there is Tavant Technologies. They are the ones who are building some of the technologies there, which we are then taking to Land O'Lakes. So the IP then belongs to whoever's actually built the model, while we are more in the process of bringing the technology, empowering them to build these models, which otherwise would have been very hard for them without these technology tools. So we think of ourselves, if you think of it as a tools provider, as someone who's building these tools for anyone in the ag tech space to do more. Right now, they're at a certain level with FarmBeats, with the tools that we're building. We want to take them to the next really big step up from where they are right now.
That's really cool. And I also saw on the Azure FarmBeats webpage that it seems like the USDA is kind of also fairly involved with trying to use FarmBeats to, gather a lot of these kind of siloed data streams like you were talking about earlier. Could you speak to that partnership at all as well?
Yeah, at USDA, we are working with ARS, Agricultural Research Service, and the Forest Service, with both of them. With the Agricultural Research Service, these are the stellar agricultural researchers, and they run several ARS sites across the US. And at these ARS sites, we are helping, at some of them, they're leveraging FarmBeats to gather a lot of the data, adding new types of sensors, and then leveraging, in some cases, even TV white spaces to bridge connectivity, bringing in satellite data, being able to see the data, run their AI algorithms on top. So that's with ARS. With Forestry Service, we are working with Florida A&M University on where they're building we work with them to build some of the AI algorithms on estimating estimating the damage after disaster. For example, after a hurricane, can you quickly get the data from the area where the hurricane hit and estimate how much damage happened? This year we saw with the derecho storm, there was $4 to $6 billion damage, and it took forever to figure out how much damage actually happened. So those are the kind of things that we are enabling working with the USDA. And again, with each one of these engagements, it's very unique. When we partner with them, each of these organizations bring in very unique expertise. Like with USDA, the kind of research that they do. With CSIRO is another one. With CSIRO in Australia, they do some very cutting edge agricultural research. But again, to those agricultural researchers, we are providing the platform, we are providing the AI, the data, so that they can then enhance the research to the next level. Like with CSIRO, you might have heard about the AppSim model that they built for plant growth. Now, as you build those, how do you use AI in an AppSim-like model to do even more accurate modeling? So those are some of the things that we are doing with different organizations. The engagement models are different.
Awesome.
That's incredible. So what do you foresee being Azure FarmBeats' biggest opportunity for growth in the coming years?
Yeah, so see, the vision here is to make every farmer use data-driven technologies, right? The goal that we have, what we want to get to, is a world where so it's about food. It's about not just feeding the world, but nourishing the world and nourishing the world sustainably without harming the planet. If you think of that as the future, what we are doing now with FarmBeats is just scratching the surface. FarmBeats is just about the farm. But once you start bridging it across the entire food supply chain, is when you can start unlocking new efficiencies. If you look at the entire food supply chain, all the way from input companies to equipment companies to the farm, to the logistics companies, to the food distributors, the processors, the retailers, it's an entire chain. Each entity in the food supply chain could use data to make themselves more efficient, like FarmBeats for the farm. You could do a similar thing for a manufacturing plant. When these entities start sharing data with one another, we believe you could start unlocking even new efficiencies in the entire food supply chain. And that's the vision that we want to get to. We want to get to a place where you should be able to exchange this data. You want to be able to use this data to drive new efficiencies, to make sure that you're growing with less, you're directing food, you're reducing food waste, you're taking it to the people who need them, and you're giving everyone the food that they need. The ultimate vision here is that consumers would treat food as medicine. They would eat food that is best for them. And everyone has some different food could work differently for each person. And the world will get there. It's about how do we accelerate the entire food industry to go in that direction. And the farm by itself plays a very important role. That's the genesis. That's the central point based on which the entire food chain would be driven. Yeah, people are talking about alternative proteins and things like that, lab-based meats. But even if you look at that, the genesis of that, they're looking at some of the food, the inputs to that are things like chickpeas and moonbeans and millets. So these are things which, again, have to be grown somewhere, and they need to be grown the right way so that you can make the right food. So that's the vision we are after, of getting everyone the right food that they need. And in order to get there, FarmBeats is just scratching the surface. There's huge amounts of opportunity in the entire food supply chain.
Absolutely.
Wow.
All of that has to be enabled by connectivity. And so if you're thinking about this rural connectivity aspect, do you think that addressing this particular issue is going to be more of a private and public emphasis on just kind of bringing existing technologies into cooperation and just, implementing them in rural areas? Or do you think it's that we still need to develop more technologies that actually fit these rural areas appropriately?
For connectivity?
Yep.
I think for connectivity, we need to do more than what exists. I think we don't have all the solutions. If someone says we do, I don't think we do. We still need to do more. Just to prove my point, around the world, about 40% of the world doesn't have internet access. And the reason they are not on the internet is not because they don't have internet coverage. Like 90% of the world has some sort of internet connectivity to connect to the internet. It's just not affordable enough. So I think being able to build these affordable broadband technologies is key, especially when you're talking of the farm. A farm, there's no human there usually in the middle of a farm. You need to get Internet of Things data. How do you get this data at scale so that you can drive all of these decisions is, I think, a problem that needs to be addressed. There are very promising technologies, like TV white spaces I would call as a promising technology. LEO satellites is another promising technology. But a lot more needs to be addressed. Because the other thing I wanted to point out about connectivity in a farm is the definition of broadband. Right now, the way the FCC defines broadband, for example, is 25 megabits per second downlink and 3 megabits a second uplink connection. From a farm, most of the transmissions will be uplink and not downlink. You might want to even flip it. For farms, when you're talking of broadband, it should be 3 meg down, 25 meg up, or even more. But existing technologies don't get you there. Like, for example, with LEO satellites, again, your capacity is in the downlink direction, not in the uplink direction. The uplink capacity is still constrained. So how do you get to a future where you can provide pervasive, high bandwidth connectivity, uplink connectivity to the cloud? is an unsolved problem. Part of the solution is edge compute. How well, you don't need to set everything up. You could be doing things on the edge, but that's also evolving. Like we have a solution for Microsoft, and we need to adapt it even more to see what can be done on the edge. For some other things, you really need to send things to the cloud. So those are things that need to still be addressed. I think if you were to ask me what is the state of the art, I would say we have a lot of promising tech, but we still need to address, we still need to come up with innovations to address the problem of broadband in the farm. Yep. And the other piece is, part of it is a technology problem. The other part is a policy problem, where you need the right incentives. You need to have the right policies in place. The FCC has been doing the right things, but I think a lot more needs to be done. And worldwide, I think FCC is still the leader as far as policymakers are concerned. I think worldwide, other regulators need to be moving fast as well to make the right decisions to enable broadband in the farm.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. From some of your responses, it sounds like, developing nations have kind of provided a lot of inspiration for some of these technologies or really push some of these things forward. How do you go about developing a technology that fits, developing nations and where the United States agriculture infrastructure is, and how is it going to impact these different countries and their different agriculture systems?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, right, Samantha? And I struggled with it as well when I started doing this project as to who do we target. And if you were to ask me right now, I think we have built technology that works reasonably well for farms that are tens of acres or more. It's something that, if you talk of data-driven agriculture solutions, they work at that level. They still don't work for the smallholder farmers, mostly because of the cost. And that's something that needs to be addressed, because like around half a billion farmers, majority of them are smallholder farmers. So how do you get technology to them? So that's why part of the technology that has shipped are things that work at tens of acres or more, while we are still thinking in terms of how do we get to the last mile? How do we get to the farmers who are small? That's still something where we are continuing to do research, like the things I talked about. If we can get this Wi-Fi sensing to work, that can really help solve the problem. In fact, I'm writing, along with Stuart Collis at the Gates Foundation, we've just written a white paper on how do you enable digital agriculture for smallholder farmers. This is, it's still in the review process, but that's something where we put down our thoughts on what are those technology breakthroughs that are needed in things like connectivity, in artificial intelligence, in speech, in human interaction. That is, some things we assume how to use a phone. Well, we can't just assume that for many people around the world. The literacy levels are not there. The technology savviness is not there. So that's in that white paper, we try to cover a lot of these problems where we are still continuing to actively invest in addressing that problem, because that really needs to be addressed if we are to make farming worldwide to be data-driven.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm looking forward to seeing that white paper, and we'll be sure to share that with our listeners as well on our streams, because I think it's something valuable that I think it's easy for us to kind of put out of our minds when we just think about our lives here. But, for anybody who's traveled internationally, I think they understand, what the different challenges are, especially with those smallholder farms, because it looks nothing like what, a giant row crop farm here in the Midwest looks like. Yeah. So one question I really like to ask you after, hearing all of your responses is not only what do you hope to see in the agriculture industry in the next 5 to 10 years, but what do you really think we're going to be able to get to within the next 5 or 10 years? What do you think is a practical goal to have?
I think we will start seeing more adoption of these data-driven agriculture techniques, these digital techniques. I think what I'm seeing based on the trends, we'll see, of course, much more adoption in the medium to large farms, especially in the developed world. Farms in the US, they'll all go in that direction to start using more technology, adopting more data. We'll start seeing more and more of that. And part of the trigger would be, of course, driven by productivity, but it will also be driven by sustainability. That is, for using the right practices in the farm in order to get carbon credits, for example, like with the carbon bank proposal that's coming up at the USDA and so on. You would need to provide information about what's happening in the farm. You really can't go and manually be getting all of that information. Yeah. You start using data. Once you start adopting these techniques, like for example, if you're doing cover cropping or you're using no-till or reduced till, you need to know what the impact of that is going to be on your productivity. How can you still be productive, even more productive, while using some of these regenerative agriculture practices? Part of that would be driven by data. So what I'm seeing is an increased adoption in digital agriculture techniques because of the trend towards being more sustainable, the acknowledgement and the need to sequester more carbon in soil, to make the soils richer. But that's something which I think is going to happen, is going to accelerate. Worldwide, I hope a lot more happens. I think that's where I'm a bit more concerned. I'm seeing that, and it needs to happen. Otherwise, this problem, when we're talking about this divide between what's happening in the developed world and the emerging markets, is going to keep on increasing. And that's where the governments need to be taking the right decisions to help these farmers adopt the right tools to be more productive. Because, the other thing that we talk about climate change. Well, when we talk of climate change, we talk about how agriculture could be a solution. The thing is, climate change could impact farmers as well. And it will impact the smallholder farmers even more, because these are the people who are not equipped with the right tools to deal with variation in weather, for example. A few degrees here and there, unexpected rainfall, these guys are going to suffer. So unless we address that problem, we need to move towards more climate smart agriculture, being able to provide these tools, these digital tools, so that they can adapt, they can take the right decisions. So I think that's why it's imperative for us to even start thinking in terms of smallholder farmers and how we can bring technology to them so that we can help them be more productive as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the sustainability piece and the carbon, and we keep hearing more and more about that, which is great. And I'm sure we could have a whole nother episode on just that part as well. But to wrap everything up, what piece of advice do you have for individuals involved in the agricultural industry for, developing the skills necessary to be successful, or how to get connected in this digital agriculture landscape?
Yeah. So people in the ag space, now, of course, they're like you are grad students, you are doing cutting edge work, you're already in this, learning a lot of digital tools and working with the right people. But anyone else who's in this space, I would encourage them to pick up some of the core data skills, which includes artificial intelligence, machine learning, just the basic skills of how do you use any of these tools in your daily decisions. I think that would be helpful. Just the fact, and for growers, it would be about they don't need to learn machine learning, but it'd be more around, if you have data to augment your knowledge in the farm, how would you use this data? And there are a few examples, and there are a few farmers who we work with who've been really amazing. That there's this one farmer, he farms over 9,000 acres in eastern Washington, spread across 45 miles. And whenever he takes out his tractor, he looks at the predicted weather forecast using AI, the thing that we're doing for micro level forecast, to see whether it's the right time to be spraying, and over the next few hours. Because once he takes the tractor out, he's going to be out for a few hours. If it starts getting windy, it's going to be a disaster. So how do you use data to start taking your decisions? He uses that he knows his farm, he knows some of the topographies in his farm, what the land looks like. And then he uses this data that we are providing with how his crops are growing to even decide how he should be seeding the next year. So this is where I think for growers, it would be more about thinking, hey, I know a lot about the farm. Which are the parts, if I had this additional data, can I do better? Right? And that's something which the growers should do. And the other ag tech professionals, I think it's both about data and learning the skills where needed, because the more of these tech skills that you need, the more you'll be able to do, the more productive you'll be able to do, and the more sustainable agriculture we'll be able to practice.
Yeah. I think that's a really good way to put it. I particularly like, as far as the grower advice, saying, I already know a lot, but what is it that if I had that, what would make me that much better? I think that's a really good way of looking at the whole data piece and digital agriculture in general.
Yeah, the part, the few things about when we talk about growing food, the parts that we didn't talk about was the entire thing on the supply chain, the transparency piece. The one thing which I'm really fascinated about now is how the entire supply chain plays a role. That is, the food that we eat, a lot of it depends on how that food was grown, what nutrients were put in soil, what farm management practices were used. And if you could somehow carry that information to the consumer, it would enable a lot of value. It would create a lot of value for the grower, for the people in the supply chain, and for the consumer. There is this trend that is happening in the food industry where people are talking about food as medicine. That is, food is not just what we eat. Food is preventive medicine. Like you could be, and that's a trend that is happening in the food industry. And if you have to enable that vision, you need technology to be able to carry this information. And in fact, creating this loop, that is, I as a consumer should be able to say, this is what is good for me. Multiple consumers should be able to say that, which results in a demand at the farmer to grow the crop a certain way, which then comes back to the food that comes back to me. Creating this feedback loop is something that doesn't exist now, but will happen in the future. And that is where everyone involved in the food industry, from chemical engineers to agricultural scientists to computer scientists to roboticists, everyone needs to put their minds together to see how this is going to happen. And it will happen. It's somewhere where health is something where people will put money to make anything related to health happen. If you think of food as a medicine, eventually it will get there.
That's true.
Yeah, it happens slowly right now between like marketing. I mean, you see how organic really took off and how that caused a feedback, but yeah, you're talking a lot faster and more reactive type of thing. That's incredible to think about. That was a great discussion with an incredible innovator, Ranveer Chandra, regarding Microsoft FarmBeats. And Ranveer talked about a lot of resources and articles that they're working on and publishing. So if you would like to read into any more of that, please check out our show notes for those links.
Yeah, those are going to be great resources for people out there, I think. When I think of this interview, the word that comes to mind for me is enabling, because that's really what I think FarmBeats, not only are they doing, but that's what they're really seeking to do, is they're seeking to enable ag tech businesses that are trying to build on their platform. They're seeking to enable farmers in the Midwest, and they're also seeking to enable small shareholder farmers with all their innovation, right? So I think it's pretty cool, and I just think enabling is a good way to describe what they're doing.
I completely agree. They're doing a great job of identifying challenges globally, but then not just thinking about what can we invent to fix this. They're thinking about what can we make that's accessible. And that's incredible. You think about your cell phone, your smartphone example. That was awesome to hear about.
Yeah, all really cool technologies. And so we hope that you all who are listening enjoyed that episode as much as we did. And we also hope that you enjoyed hearing Ranveer's vision for the future of agriculture. So next week, we're going to jump from this global company, Microsoft, that we all know about, to more of a local startup, Realm 5, that's actually right down the street from the University of Nebraska, and learn how they're addressing rural connectivity challenges for data-driven solutions. We look forward to seeing you then. Thank you for taking the time to join us today on the FarmBits Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts to be informed about the latest content each week.
We welcome your feedback, so if you have comments or questions for us, please reach out to us over email, on Twitter, or in the review section of your favorite podcast platform. Our contact information can also be found in the show notes.
We would like to thank Nebraska Extension for their support of this podcast and their commitment to providing high-quality informational material to members of the agricultural community in Nebraska and beyond.
The opinions expressed by the hosts and guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the views of Nebraska Extension or the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
We look forward to you joining us next week for another episode of FarmBits.